Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hope Matrix today. Super excited to have you all here, and especially grateful for our guest, Miss Charlene Sunkel, who's from South Africa. And I've worked with Charlene for many, many years. I met her in South Africa. I'm super excited to have her here. Welcome from South Africa. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me. And it's excellent that we remained in contact for so many years. And it just shows you how network globally kind of bring us together.
I know. Yeah, it's amazing. So I met Charlene in South Africa presenting at a conference. We're both on advisory boards for the global mental health movement, and it was in Johannesburg, and she put on the greatest conference ever. It was really pretty extraordinary, and it was so fun and so engaging and really different for mental health. So I'm excited we've stayed in touch too. And Charlene, you have done so much work since then. It's pretty extraordinary. So congratulations on it all.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, so we'll get right into it, but I wanted to just remind our listeners today, we here at the Hope Matrix talk about hope and hopeful mindsets. And we've kind of created the 5 keys to hope. I just want to give a brief overview of those first. What we talk about, what makes up hope. So when we talk about the 5 keys to hope, we're talking about first identifying and recognizing that stress response and learning to manage it. The second key is practicing habits for happiness. The third is taking inspired actions using SMART goals. Those SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. The fourth is creating a very strong hope network and really strengthening that network. And the fifth is overcoming some common challenges to hope, like rumination, internalizing failure, worrying about the future, and trying to control things that are out of our control. So we'll talk about hope today kind of through that framework and talk to Charlene about her lived experience with schizophrenia and all of the really amazing work she's doing around the world and really how hope ties into that. So again, thanks for joining today and listening in. And Charlene, thanks so much for joining us. I'd love to just talk a little bit more about yourself and your lived experience and how you got involved in this work as it relates to global mental health.
Yeah, if I think back, I'm actually shocked by the number. If I think 30 years ago, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I can't believe it's so long. Either I feel old by the number or something. But that's kind of where my journey really started and kind of escalated to where I am today. So I think what really kind of bounced me out of my bad situation was I experienced a lot of abuse because I ended up in hospitals. I ended up had a lot of involuntary admissions, and I came to realize about the gaps and the abuse and everything happening in the mental health system, and that wasn't really designed for recovery. You can imagine, so it was a long time ago, so it's a bit different. It's quite different now, um, especially with the abuse part. And I still remember everyone, including the psychiatrist that I had, said to me, okay, you will never be able to work ever again in your life, never be able to live on your own, never be able to manage your own funds. You know, it was everything about what I would never be able to do. So thankfully, I did have a hidden rebel hidden inside of me. So everybody that kept saying to me what I couldn't do, I decided I will do it. So it was kind of that determination that got me going. But I know at the time I was also given up to a certain degree. Um, and I think I first realized I first need to work on myself. I need to get rid of all this negativity inside of me and kind of rather build on the positive aspects of everything. Of course, at the time I was like sleeping like 20 hours a day. So I literally only got up to eat or go to the bathroom or that, and I slept. And I said, obviously, I can't get anywhere or change my life if that's the situation. So I came to kind of build small, attainable goals for myself. I forced myself to get up in the morning, even though at that time I lost my job, so I didn't have a job. I forced myself, I got up in the morning, I went and I walked around the block, just to get some exercises to bring that element in. I went to buy a newspaper just to force myself to read at least two articles, was to stay up to date with what's happening in the world. And apart from that, is my concentration was also a bit bad reading a book, for example. So for me, it was good to read short articles. Then I did cleaning. I did something creative. I always been of a creative person. So from there on, it was torture, I must say, for a few months, and then I started volunteering in the mental health field because nobody would give me a job because of the stigma back then. Nobody could imagine that someone with a mental health condition, especially schizophrenia, would ever be able to work. So I thought, okay, let's volunteer, and that way I'll be able to prove myself, my abilities. I did that for 2 years, and then someone, a provincially based organization, offered me a job. Of course, everybody said, don't bother taking it because you will never last more than 3 months. So I just had to take it. And I actually lasted 8 years. I worked 8 years for that organization where I did advocacy and human rights work. Then I moved on to a national organization. And in between, I got involved in international work. And I must stress that it was actually people who gave me opportunities and who believed in me. And that opened a lot of doors for me. So once I got into the international space, I decided, okay, we need some global advocacy, human rights, and building lived experience leadership, and so on. And that's how I ended up eventually establishing the Global Mental Health Peer Network.
Wow, that is so extraordinary. I mean, if you knew Charlene, you wouldn't even think I mean, imagine that to be your story. And, you display so many of the skills as it relates to staying hopeful. I mean, when you think about hopelessness is a consequence of oppression, really. And hopelessness is that sense of despair or that feeling of despair and sense of helplessness. And being told when you given a diagnosis and then being told you will amount to nothing is, the most blatant form, I think, of oppression. And talk about taking away an ability to have a future orientation, which is so key to hope. I can't imagine really what you experienced at that time and how far you've come, using all of the skills as it relates to hope, even when so much of the odds are against you. So I mean, if you had been to the conference that I attended with Charlene and have seen the work she's been doing around the world in global mental health, you would really be astounded. And I definitely encourage you to check out her story and her work, that we'll kind of get into. But gosh, you are such an example of hope, in so many ways, and not just talking about hope as a wish, but really taking the actions. When you say back to, the initial days, just getting up and walking around the block. And, I would imagine you were in a bit of despair at that time. You said it was really hard and the feelings associated with that. And, we often run from our feelings, but that's really the first key to hope is identifying and managing those stressful, that pain, that despair, that sense of just feeling bad about it, and really just getting and managing those, experiencing those emotions and kind of walking through them. And it was that kind of what you were doing at that time, do you think?
Yes, definitely. I think there were a few things for me that was, if I had to highlight what was really, really difficult for me, was not to get bothered by what other people thought of me. For me, it was more a matter of I needed to believe in myself and not what other people think or of me or what about my abilities. I just internalized kind of my strength, if I can put it that way.
Absolutely. And like you said, I mean, mental health is so highly stigmatized, and especially schizophrenia, because people don't understand it. And a lot of times, what we don't understand, we fear and we judge, and it's so unhelpful. which is why it's so important that you share your story and you share what you do that works, and you share with other people how to build connections with you, is that is so important. And that feeling of isolation and aloneness in a fragile period, I can just imagine it was very, very challenging. And yet, you took those steps for yourself, getting out, reading short things, just doing things that put you on a different kind of trajectory. Really pretty amazing. What would you say to people that judge people with schizophrenia? Like, what's the message you would like to get out to them?
Yeah, I think probably the worst misperception around schizophrenia is that we are violent and aggressive and more prone to crime, which is absolutely not true. I think we sometimes are more prone to harm ourselves or to be victims of crime. I think that's a key message. And I think for me, what's important is um, how will people ever be able to get to kind of prove themselves or their abilities if nobody gives you an opportunity, if nobody believes that you are able to do this? Only then will you be able to show how capable you are. And I mean, I know a lot of people with schizophrenia who are very successful. I think your diagnosis or your psychosocial disability shouldn't be used to define who you are. That should just kind of be in the back, just a minor obstacle, I would say. But it shouldn't define who you are and what you are able to achieve.
Absolutely. And when I talk about my own mental health diagnoses, I mean, there's the negative aspect of it, and then there's the positive. So there's the negative of anxiety, of depression, of PTSD, of ADHD. And there's also a lot of positives that come from it as well. And so I try to focus on those positives. What do you think are the positives of schizophrenia? Like, what has it brought you?
It's almost like it taught me to learn a lot about myself. It taught me to learn that I'm unique. I know a lot of people often say, yeah, but we don't want to be different because being different is kind of stigmatizing. And I always tell them it's actually boring to be like everybody else. So to be unique and different is actually very exciting. So that's how I kind of see myself. I don't want to be like anybody else. So for me, that is an important element.
Yeah, I like that. And you're incredibly creative. I mean, when I went to your conference, one of the things I just loved about it is the diversity of types of talks you brought, and people and art and creativity and spoken, poetry. And it was really, I think, what highlights the beauty of global mental health and mental health, our ability to be very creative. And there were scientists, but it wasn't just science, so there was a lot of different kind of aspects, which I really loved. So you definitely have a gift for creativity and bringing a lot of different types of people together.
Yes, I thought with when I was organizing that, I think if we look at years back, what I kind of observed is all these conferences are so scientifically heavy, if I can put it that way, that you actually make it inaccessible to those you actually want to educate more about these issues. So it's nice to make it diverse, and the creativity specifically is when I was in hospital for months at a time. That is where I realized or noticed that so many people or the patients in the hospital was really creative. And only if you can use that creativity is one way of breaking down the stigma, because now you're showing the abilities, something that you would never have thought they could do. And yes, something, and also for them to see that they're not useless. They do. For me, everybody's got a talent. I don't care what you say, everybody's got a talent, whatever it is, even if it's growing a plant or painting or whatever. Everybody's got a talent. And I think that is what you need to build on.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I love we have a passion map we do with kids in our hope work and, identifying our passions and using that. And our talents can be used in a lot of different ways and yeah, it's such a important part of hope. I wanted to ask you, so I think potentially a lot of the fears around schizophrenia is like when we trigger people and they react in ways that we're uncomfortable with or don't know how to deal with, we then get in our own fear response. So I just wanted to talk about that for a minute. When you're triggered by something, or I don't know if it can be generalized to schizophrenia, or you can give examples. Like, what are things that trigger someone with schizophrenia, and then I want to talk about how that might show up in body language or behavior, and then what we can do to help kind of mitigate that or to help de-escalate it as opposed to escalate it with our own stress response.
Yeah, I think first of all, people have a tendency to treat you differently. They think they're very good at hiding it, but you can actually pick it up from people when they treat you differently. And what I found, especially back then with my family and the friends I had at that time, was immediate change in behavior. Immediately I could see, I sensed that they didn't know how to talk to me. They didn't know what to say to me because they were so scared of how I potentially would react. And all I wanted is don't treat me any different than you did before. Treat me like any person. I'm not going to freak out or anything like that. Things that do trigger me is that do kind of had in the past and over the years maybe led me to kind of, how can I say, almost a relapse, stress. So I needed to manage and find ways to deal with the stress. That's probably my best trigger. I know also with medication. Yeah, I've had a lot of experimentation with my medication. I think a lot of us did because you need to check if you really need it. So eventually I came to the realization, okay, I do need the medication. Um, so, but sometimes you also find in terms of medication, people also treat you different, almost like they call it pull shaming or, you know, making you feel ashamed that you're using medication, psychiatric medication. Other things that also kind of trigger me is if you blatantly exclude me from things merely because I have a diagnosis of schizophrenia. So, but over the years, I have also learned to, like I said, not be bothered what other people think. I am now in a better position to verbalize when someone kind of treats me where I feel, okay, you're making me very uncomfortable by how you're behaving. I will actually say it to them that, just treat me like anybody else. You're making me uncomfortable. I think it's learning to verbalize. Sometimes it's not intentionally how people treat you, but eventually it becomes a communication gap and it just makes things worse. If you're able to that. And that also builds trust between people. So they also know, okay, now I won't trigger. If I want to say something that I'm not sure, just check. Will this trigger you? I'm going to say something now. The communication need to be there. That is very important that I find. Yeah.
And how do the triggers like manifest physically? Like, do you feel your heart start pounding, or do you like are there any physical sensations?
Yeah, I become terribly distracted. What happens to me is what I normally see is I become very quiet. Actually, I won't easily make eye contact. It's almost like I was drawing in my own head, and eventually everything around me becomes kind of fades away. I also become easily distracted. I can't follow a conversation. I can't understand things, what people say properly. Um, those are kind of things, but I never had aggressive or violent outbursts. never. These are basically the things that kind of happen to me. But I think it is important to know yourself and know your condition, kind of know where you draw the line, to realize, when now you're going into really a dangerous phase. Because for me, it's almost like if I don't realize immediate signs like withdrawing, not making eye contact, that kind of thing, if I don't act on it immediately to make sure that I have all my things in check, I need to get enough sleep. I must eliminate the stress. I must go to the psychiatrist if needed to usually increase the meds for a period. Otherwise, I don't realize things and then I just spin out of control. Um, so those are issues that I find personally for myself.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how much my sleep impacts my mood. And if I have one day of off sleep, I wake up and the day is off. And, it's my focus for that day is just managing my mood and my stress response and really just kind of making it through the day. I mean, for me, sleep is just, it really dictates so much. And it's definitely a trigger. And if I go several days without sleep, it's really, yeah, it's not great for my hope state. So it's very key and important.
Yeah, no, sleep is definitely also fine if I don't sleep my limit of 8 hours a night. Pretty much I cannot function properly the next day, sometimes even for 2 days. So that's an important element, and also to balance your life, not to work. I love watching movies. So for me, that's kind of almost an escape, it relaxes me. So I need try to balance it with sleep, work, doing something I like. Funny enough, I love cleaning. I don't know. I just find cleaning my place very relaxing. I don't know. I just love doing it.
Yeah, that's great. So that kind of helps you with your stress response. You clean. I like that. Yeah, interesting. I have to get everything really organized. So don't like make it really organized. If I feel stress, chaos in my mind, I organize everything. So at least that external organization helps my, yeah, internal chaos. Yeah, and that's great. And we talked a bit about happiness habits. So what you do to stay. We talk about when we talk to kids and teach kids, we teach them about the downstairs brain, which is where our kind of stress response is, and then the upstairs brain, which is where we're creative and problem solving and collaborative and all that. So I think that you've shared a bit about creativity and how that supports you to kind of stay in your upstairs brain. And then the third key, we talk about setting SMART goals or taking inspired action using SMART goals. One thing I want to illustrate, you spoke earlier, when we're in our stress response and we're not in our creative problem solving place, we don't really want to move forward into action. We first want to get our mood state into a better place. And I think showing how in your early years, just getting up and just, making small goals, but not doing these big, setting something like the global mental health movement, the group. It wouldn't have been something you'd wanted to do in that state, but you first want to work on your own internal state, your mood state, until you can get in a better place where you're then able to take these really amazing leaps and set bigger goals and do really cool things. So I think your just illustration of how you did that through your story was so important, and I think important for people to kind of listen to and hear and understand. So key to hope. Can you speak a little to your network and how, first of all, your personal network, how you created your own, and then also the Global Mental Health Peer Network that you created, which is absolutely amazing and just changing lives for so many?
Yes, let's start with my personal network. Um, I kind of rebuilt my connection with my sisters. They very supportive of me, so I always keep in contact. That's for me is valuable. Um, my deputy CEO, we kind of very strong peer supporters of each other, and so it is actually so wonderful that we are there for each other when we go through stressful situations. For me, also the representatives, the lived experience people within the Global Mental Health Peer Network, and we got more than 70 from across the world. And what is absolutely amazing for me is we actually feel like a family. Everybody feels like a family. Everybody supports one another. That to me is also exceptional. I never actually expected that when I started the peer network, but it kind of formed by itself. My other support network is not really human, but it's my two birds. So they they help me a lot. I don't know, they kind of have a calming effect on me. For example, my parrots, they would sit with me in the evening when we watch movies. So the parrot, the moment I touch my mobile phone, she will bite me or she will bite the phone. So she actually kind of helped me not to work when I need to relax. So she's very helpful in that way. Um, but the peer network itself, so it was launched at the summit that you mentioned about the Global Mental Health Summit. So we launched it there. The idea was to create new global mental health lived experience leadership. Because in my kind of experience from being involved in the global space, was it was always the same lived experience representatives, try to give input into strategic documents and policies to, to change things for the better. So for me, it was we are missing so many other voices, especially from low and middle income countries. So that's how I kind of got to be a network. But of course, there are obstacles in low and middle income countries like stigma and discrimination. Um, there's still a lot of issues. People aren't comfortable to come out and say that I have a lived experience. So that is difficult. But I am quite surprised that the majority of our lived experience country representatives are actually from low and middle income country. So that was a total surprise. And for me, just to see, we're now currently standing, I think, on 35 countries that we are represented in at the moment. We appoint up to 5 people with lived experience to represent their country. And then we have a regional structure based on the World Health Organization's 6 world regions. So we got a regional lead and a deputy lead. So the regions kind of function uh, kind of almost on their own. They come up with their own activities, their own focus areas. For example, Africa will, of course, focus a lot on addressing stigma issues because that is very rife in this region. So they will do stuff like that. I think for me, the most rewarding is to see how all of these guys actually grew, became empowered. Uh, their confidence is, you know, they really built a lot of confidence, self esteem, and all those positive aspects. So for me, that's absolutely rewarding to see that happen throughout the past 2 years. We also have honorary members and honorary mentors. So we just established a mentorship program. So all the new country representatives will now be assigned like a mentor, will teach them and empower them. The whole idea is not to appoint representatives from countries who are already at a global level of advocacy and in the mental health space, but rather those who are not there yet and rather empower them to eventually get to that level. But we do various activities, and it's actually the country representatives that kind of guide what we do. They kind of highlight we want to focus on this and this and this, and then we as the global office help them, develop strategic kind of plans to implement that. It's a lot to talk about the peer network, so but that is kind of the crux of it. Um, of course, the main idea is to strengthen the voices of people with lived experience globally.
Yeah, which is so important. So very important. How can people get involved in the peer network?
We are proudly 100% lived experience from our board of management staff, volunteers, and within the executive structures are all lived experience. And we are currently really looking to appoint more country representatives. On our website, people can visit the website, all the information is there. You can go under the committees page. The application forms are there, the terms of reference, what the role is of representatives. Otherwise, people are welcome to contact me directly as well if they want to know more. But I think our website is quite comprehensive in exactly what we do and how people can get involved.
Amazing. And what is that website? We'll list it in the link too, but yeah.
www.gmhpn.org.
Perfect. Global Mental Health Peer Network. So those initials. Yes, perfect. Yeah, and we'll put it in the link too. It's amazing to me. I've been attending the MHGAP Summit in Geneva, Switzerland for many, many years. And when I started, the first time I was there, I was there with just a bunch of scientists, and they just called me like the sunflower or the yellow. I was always in my yellow and talking about branding and marketing and getting celebrities engaged and what other disease states had done to end stigma. And yeah, I stuck out quite a bit. And it's been really amazing to see, and you've driven a lot of this change, getting other voices, getting folks with lived experience, getting them. I mean, we can't create policies and understand the depth of the problem without engaging, with people that are dealing with the problem on a daily basis or the challenge and especially solutions, and I think your group has done a really incredible job bringing those to the global stage and some really I would highly recommend to anyone listening to get engaged in it. If you have lived experience or know someone with lived experience, because I do think it's a powerful way to kind of drive change and to be heard and to feel valued, which, as you said, is so important for us all. We all need to feel valued as humans. It's really a basic human need, and our those with mental health conditions have been discriminated and oppressed for so long. When I got engaged in the space too many years ago, I was astounded at what happens in Africa, throughout Africa, and the human rights abuses that are occurring, and some of the beliefs there that we now know through science aren't true, and so it's especially brave for you, being on the continent and in South Africa to come out and to drive change. It takes a lot of courage and bravery. So I commend you for that as well. Um, very,
Thank you very much. Yes, I think now that you mentioned also like the culture and issues in Africa, the Africa regional guys, they actually hosted a webinar on this specific topic. And that video is actually on our website as well.
oh, wonderful. Great. Yeah, you can check it out. That's amazing. So good. And we'll just kind of wrap up here. I think the fifth key to hope is really overcoming challenges to hope, common challenges to hope. And one thing we talk about is a common challenge is trying to control the controllables. So I love that you talked early on about turning the news off, because when we surround ourselves with information and data that we can't control, it can often lead to a great sense of despair and helplessness, which are the two kind of components of hopelessness. Did you do that consciously? I mean, was that a conscious decision around the news?
Yes, definitely, because I just couldn't. I felt very overwhelmed with COVID being when you go online, it's there. When you switch on the television, it's there, just everywhere. So I don't really know what's going on with COVID because I've kind of disconnected myself from it for my
Yes,
own mental health.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. Was there anything else you want to share with our listeners today while we have you? We're so lucky to have you, your time.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure to work with you in whatever capacity. But I think maybe to share a slight lesson, I think life is not always easy, but I think things to go wrong. And I think the positive side is to take the wrong and see what you learn from it and build something right, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yes, I love that. Yeah, my greatest pains in life, when I've really kind of felt the pains, I've let them inform my passions. So, yeah,
Exactly.
and they've been fuel for change. So I love that. I love ending on that. It's beautiful. So wonderful. Well, again, listeners, Charlene Sunkel, and we'll put the link to her programs in the comments and in the about of the podcast. And really grateful to you listeners for getting engaged and learning more about the global mental health space and schizophrenia specifically and how it relates to hope. And we really hope it reaches those in need and gives you some practical tools that you can kind of implement and kind of maybe opens up your mind a bit to mental health. So thank you so much for listening today and wishing you all a blessed day.